There is a moment most women never forget. Not the first kiss, not the first date. It's quieter than that. It's the moment you're sitting across from someone. Maybe it's just coffee, maybe it's just conversation, and something inside you goes completely still. Not the nervous, excited kind of still. The kind of still that feels like recognition, like your body knew something your mind hadn't caught up to yet, like some ancient, wordless part of you exhaled and whispered, "There you are." You didn't choose that feeling. You didn't plan for it. And if you're being honest with yourself, it scared you a little. Maybe it scared you a lot. Carl Jung, one of the most radical and misunderstood psychologists who ever lived, spent over 4 decades trying to explain exactly that moment. Not the butterflies, not the chemistry, not the checklist of qualities you thought you wanted, but that feeling, that inexplicable, irrational, soul-level recognition that happens before your logic has a chance to intervene. He believed it was the most important psychological event a human being could experience, and he believed most people run from it. Today, I want to walk you through 5 signs rooted in Jungian psychology that you have found the love of your life. Not the love that looks good on paper, not the love that your family approves of or your friends celebrate on Instagram. The love that changes you. The love that cracks you open and puts you back together differently. The love your soul has been moving toward your entire life, even through all the wrong turns, all the heartbreak, all the years you spent wondering if you were broken because nothing ever felt quite right. But I need to warn you first. Some of what I'm about to share might be uncomfortable. It might hold up a mirror to a relationship you walked away from and make you wonder. It might illuminate something about a person in your life right now that frightens you with its accuracy, or it might give language, finally, to something you have felt for years but could never explain. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you are not just going to understand love differently. You are going to understand yourself differently, and that changes everything. Let's start with something Jung said that almost no one talks about. He said that we do not fall in love with a person. Not really. What we fall in love with, at first, is a projection, a living, breathing human being who carries, without knowing it, the image of the lover we have been building inside ourselves since childhood. He called it the anima in men, the inner feminine, and in women, the animus, the inner masculine. And here is where it gets personal. Every woman carries inside her a deep, often unconscious image of what the masculine looks like, feels like, sounds like, not physically, psychologically. This inner image was shaped by your father, or his absence, by the men who were kind to you and the ones who weren't. By every story you were told about love, every heartbreak you survived, every longing you buried because it felt too big or too foolish to admit. This inner image, your animus, is like a template, and without realizing it, you have been holding it up to every man you've ever met, checking to see if he fits. Most don't, not even close, and so you feel that quiet, persistent ache of incompleteness, that sense that something is always slightly off, that the people who pursue you don't quite reach you, and the ones who reach you don't stay. You wonder if you're too picky. You wonder if you're not picky enough. You wonder, in your most honest moments, if there is something wrong with you. There isn't. Your animus simply hasn't been fully met yet, and when it is, when you encounter a man who resonates with that deep inner image, not perfectly, not without complexity, but genuinely, the recognition is immediate and overwhelming. It bypasses logic entirely. And that brings us to the first sign. The first sign is that his presence activates something in you that had been sleeping. Not excitement, not attraction, though those may be there too. Something deeper, something that feels less like gaining something new and more like remembering something you had forgotten. Jung described this as the activation of the archetypal counterpart, the moment your animus encounters its reflection in the world. Think about the women you know, or think about yourself, who have described a first encounter with someone and said, "I don't know how to explain it, I felt like I already knew him." Most people dismiss that as romantic fantasy. Jung would say that is one of the most psychologically significant things a person can experience. When this person is near, parts of you come alive that have been quiet for years. Maybe you've always been guarded, careful, emotionally measured, and suddenly you find yourself saying things out loud that you've never told anyone, not because you planned to, not because you decided to trust him, but because something in his presence made the walls unnecessary. Or maybe you have always minimized yourself, made yourself smaller, quieter, less, and in his presence you feel, maybe for the first time, that all of you is not only welcome, but wanted. This isn't infatuation. Infatuation makes you perform. It makes you anxious, hyper-aware of how you're coming across, constantly managing the impression you're creating. This is different. This feels like relief, like you finally got to put something heavy down. Jung observed that this kind of activation is neurological as much as it is emotional. The deepest layers of the psyche, what he called the collective unconscious, the part of us that predates our personal memories and holds the full inheritance of human experience, respond to this person in a way that is unmistakable. Your body knows, your nervous system knows, long before your mind constructs a story about it. But here is what most people miss about this first sign, and it's important. This activation is not always comfortable. In fact, it often isn't, because when those sleeping parts of you begin to stir, they bring everything with them, including the pain that put them to sleep in the first place. You might feel an unexpected surge of grief, a sudden awareness of all the years you spent not feeling this, a fear so specific and irrational that it embarrasses you. That is not a red flag. That is your psyche reorganizing itself around something true. And that discomfort, that beautiful, terrifying discomfort, is actually the second sign wearing a disguise. The second sign is that he sees your shadow and doesn't leave. Jung's concept of the shadow is one of the most profound ideas in all of psychology, and it is almost always misunderstood. The shadow is not simply your flaws or your darkness, though it contains those. It is everything you have rejected about yourself. Everything you were taught was too much, too messy, too needy, too angry, too sad, too loud, too sensitive. Everything you learned to hide in order to be lovable. For most women, the shadow self begins forming very early. The little girl who was told she was too emotional. The teenager who learned that her anger made people uncomfortable. The young woman who discovered that being needy cost her love, so she became fiercely independent, not because she didn't need anyone, but because needing people had proven dangerous. The shadow is all the parts of you that you learned, through experience, were not safe to show. And here is what Jung understood that most relationship advice completely misses. The shadow doesn't disappear when you hide it. It becomes more powerful. It leaks out sideways, in patterns you can't explain, in reactions that feel disproportionate, in the partners you choose who seem to confirm your worst beliefs about yourself. Jung called this projection. We take what we cannot face in ourselves and we see it in other people. We are drawn to partners who carry our shadow for us, who act out the emotions we have buried, who mirror back to us the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. This is why so many smart, self-aware women end up in relationships that confuse them. Not because they are broken, because their shadow is trying to be integrated. The psyche is not random. It is always moving toward wholeness, even when it looks like self-destruction from the outside. The love of your life, in the Jungian sense, is not someone who never sees your shadow. Jung observed something else about shadow integration in relationships. The moments of greatest conflict in these deep connections are almost never about what they appear to be about. The fight about the dishes, the hurt about the unreturned text, the sudden coldness that neither of you can explain. These are not the relationship failing. These are the shadow surfaces, asking to be seen. In ordinary relationships, these moments drive people apart. In the relationship Jung described as transformative, they paradoxically deepen the bond. Because both people, if they are brave enough, can ask, what is this really about? What part of me is asking to be integrated right now? This requires a level of emotional courage that most people never develop. But when two people are capable of it, when they can stay in the discomfort long enough to reach the truth underneath, what emerges is not just intimacy, it is transformation. The third sign is synchronicity, the universe appearing to conspire. Jung coined the word synchronicity to describe something he had observed in his patients for decades and could not explain through conventional science: meaningful coincidence. Events that are not causally connected, but are meaningfully connected, linked not by logic, but by significance. He believed these events were not random. He believed they were communications from the deeper order of reality, moments when the unconscious breaks through into the visible world and says, pay attention, this matters. In the context of love, synchronicities are one of the most extraordinary and most dismissed phenomena that women describe. When synchronicities cluster around a particular person, when the coincidences become too specific, too perfectly timed, too layered with personal meaning to be dismissed, your unconscious is communicating something that your conscious mind may not be ready to accept yet. This person is significant, not just romantically significant, psychologically, spiritually, mythologically significant. They are woven into the story of your becoming. But here is what Jung said about synchronicities that almost no one repeats. They are not evidence that something will be easy. They are evidence that something is real. The universe conspires not to give you a comfortable life. It conspires to give you the experiences that will crack you open into your fullest self. Synchronicity around a person does not mean the relationship will be painless. It means it will be meaningful. It means this encounter is part of the deeper pattern of your life, whether or not it follows the shape you imagined. And that distinction between what is real and what is comfortable is what separates the women who find and keep this kind of love from the women who touch it briefly and then retreat into something safer, something that asks less of them. I want to sit with that for a moment because I think it's the most important thing I'll say today. We have all done it. Chosen the relationship that asked less, the partner who was predictable, manageable, safe, the connection that didn't shake anything loose in us. We told ourselves it was maturity. We told ourselves we were done with drama, done with intensity, done with men who made us feel too much. And some of that was true. Some of what we called drama really was just dysfunction. But some of it, and you know this if you're honest, was fear. Fear of the depth. Fear of being truly known. Fear of the transformation that comes with a love that is real. Because real love changes you. And change, even the change you've been longing for, is terrifying. Jung said that most people spend their lives choosing familiarity over truth. The familiar relationship, the familiar self-image, the familiar pain. Because at least they know how to navigate it. At least it makes sense. The unknown, even an extraordinary unknown, requires a courage that most people are never asked to develop. And that leads us to the fourth sign. The fourth sign is that he activates not just your heart, but your wholeness. Jung spent decades mapping the archetypes, the great universal patterns of human experience that live in the deepest layer of the psyche, the collective unconscious. The lover, the mother, the warrior, the sage, the wild woman, the creator, the mystic. These are not roles we play. They are dimensions of the self, each carrying its own intelligence, its own kind of love, its own contribution to a fully lived life. Most people live most of their lives with only a few of their archetypes activated. They develop the ones that were rewarded in childhood and suppress the ones that weren't. The woman who was praised for being nurturing and helpful learns to live almost entirely in the mother archetype. And her inner warrior, her capacity for boundaries, for righteous anger, for self-protection, remains undeveloped and confused. The woman who was rewarded for being strong and capable builds her identity around competence and suppresses her lover, her capacity for softness, for receiving, for being cared for, and spends years wondering why she is successful at everything except intimacy, the love of your life. In the deepest Jungian sense, is the person whose presence naturally, effortlessly unlocks the archetypes in you that have been locked. Not by trying to change you, not by telling you what you should be. Simply by being who they call forth who you are. You become braver, not because he challenges you to be braver, but because your inner warrior recognizes that it is safe to emerge. You become softer, not because he asks you to be softer, but because your lover recognizes that it can finally rest in a place where it will not be taken advantage of. You become more creative, more playful, more curious about the world. Aspects of your personality that have been dormant for years, that you had quietly mourned the loss of, return. And here is what makes this sign different from simply being with someone who makes you happy. Happy is beautiful. But happiness can be a relatively shallow experience. What I'm describing goes much deeper. This is the experience of becoming more yourself in someone's presence, of touching a version of you that you recognize as truer, fuller, more alive than the version you've been carrying alone. Have you ever walked away from time with someone feeling genuinely more like yourself? Not energized the way caffeine energizes you, but settled into yourself the way sleep settles you, as if their presence returned you to something you had been displaced from. That is the archetypal activation Jung described, and it is, without question, one of the most reliable signs that this person is not incidental to your story. They are essential to it. The fifth sign is the one that is hardest to explain and the most impossible to fake, the feeling that your life makes more sense with them in it. Jung believed that every person is born into a personal myth, a deep narrative pattern that gives coherence and meaning to the events of their life. Not a myth in the sense of something false, but a myth in the ancient sense, a sacred story. A story that holds truth so large it can't be contained in simple facts. Most people never consciously engage with their personal myth. They live it unconsciously, drawn toward certain experiences, haunted by certain patterns, inexplicably moved by certain images, stories, and ideas that feel more personally significant than they should. The myth is always there, weaving the scattered events of a life into a pattern that is trying to become visible. When you find the love of your life, the myth becomes legible. Jung called this the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you are truly meant to be. He believed that this process, in most people, reaches its fullest expression through the encounter with the significant other. Not because a partner completes you in the sense that you are incomplete alone, but because the deepest dimensions of the self can only be accessed through relationship, through the mirror of genuine intimacy, through the fire of being truly known. When you are with this person, the life you have lived, all of it, the beautiful parts and the devastating parts, begins to feel less like a series of accidents and more like a story with intention. Not because they are responsible for giving your life meaning, but because their presence in it helps you finally see the meaning that was always there. This is not romantic delusion. This is the psyche finally achieving enough integration to perceive the pattern it has been living all along. Now, before I close, I need to say something that most conversations about this topic never say. Something Jung himself was very clear about, and something that I believe is the difference between using these signs to deepen your life and using them to romanticize your pain. The love of your life is not always the love that stays. Jung did not say that. He said that certain encounters are transformative. He said that certain people catalyze your individuation in ways that are irreversible. He said that the signs I have described today are signs of a sacred connection. But sacred does not mean simple, and catalytic does not mean permanent in the way we sometimes need it to be. Some of the most psychologically significant relationships of your life may have been ones that ended, or that existed in forms that didn't fit the conventional picture, or that arrived before either of you was ready to receive what the other had to offer. The signs being present does not mean the relationship will be easy, it means it will be real. And perhaps the most Jungian thing I can say is this: your capacity to recognize these signs, to feel the activation, to sit with the shadow, to follow the synchronicities, to allow the wholeness, to trust the myth. That capacity grows every time you choose consciousness over comfort, every time you choose to look honestly at your patterns rather than repeat them, every time you choose to feel the fear and stay anyway, because the deepest truth Jung discovered after decades of sitting with thousands of human beings in their most broken and most illuminated moments is this: the love of your life is not simply a person. It is an invitation to become the fullest, most honest, most alive version of yourself. That person may be someone you've already met. They may be someone you haven't met yet. They may be someone you let go of and are only now beginning to understand. But the love that Jung described, the love that transforms, that integrates, that activates and illuminates and calls forth your wholeness, that love is not something that happens to lucky people. It is something that becomes available to people who are brave enough to do the inner work, to know themselves, to face their shadow, to follow the signs. You are here, listening to this, which means something in you already knows that you are capable of that love. Not someday. Not once you've fixed everything you think is broken about yourself. Now. Exactly as you are, with all your complexity, all your wounds, all your unanswered questions. Your unconscious already knows. Your animus is already searching. The synchronicities are already in motion. The only question now is whether you are brave enough to recognize it when it arrives, and wise enough not to run.